Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Of course, the Season 6 update is now live in Warzone, and just like with every single major update that we have in Warzone, it did introduce some new weapon tuning and then also some new weapons, which ultimately shakes up the meta a little bit. Not nearly as much as some of the other weapon tuning updates that we've had recently, but nonetheless, we do have some new changes in the overall Warzone meta. And today I wanted to go over the entirety of the Season 6 meta, show off what weapons are the best in terms of the overall meta for rifles, SMGs, close range, long range, whatever the case may be, and also what weapons are just generally competitive and or viable as well. So as we go over it all, if you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. Goal for this one is going to be 3,000 likes. And of course, if you're new to the channel or if you have not already subscribed, something like 15,000 new viewers every single day are checking out the videos for the first time. So if that's you and you want to stay up to date with everything going on in COD, this is the place to be. Feel free to hit that sub button, click that bell icon. That way you'll always know whenever I post a new video. Also, Gamer Advantage did just restock the Horizon frames. These are absolutely my favorite frames. They are the most durable, the most comfortable, and the sleekest in my opinion. They come in a bunch of different colorways. They are going to sell out pretty fast, so if you guys want to get a pair for yourself or anything else on the Gamer Advantage site, code WhosImmortal has got you covered with a nice little discount there. So we are back on the familiar tier list that I've had for quite some time. We made this a long time ago when we ranked every single weapon in the game. We of course have our basic categories after the last weapon tuning update of top meta, competitive, viable, below average, niche, which is just different, not necessarily bad, but just not like the most competitive thing in terms of every single possible gunfight. And then garbage, steaming pile of trash weapons like the Dragunov. Now disregard the extra amp. There's apparently two of them on this list that I didn't notice before. Obviously it's up here in the competitive category in general, but first and foremost, we do have two new weapons to throw into the list and rank those. Then we'll go ahead and break down all the weapons that were affected by the recent weapon changes. So we've got the Grav, aka the Galil, which we've seen multiple times in Call of Duty in the past. Then also the 410 Ironhide, which is sort of like a lever action shotgun, very similar to the MOG or like the Argus that we've had before in previous Black Ops games. Now the Grav, I won't lie, in Cold War, it is a beast. I dropped a nuke with it like my second game on. Like, it's actually a spicy meatball over there. In Warzone, though, unfortunately, it's really nothing special. I'm going to go ahead and just drop it simply in the viable category. It is borderline competitive, I would say, but its main problem is it has a lot of very noticeable recoil. It is not an easy weapon to control whatsoever, even in some of those more close range fights, especially when you get to 30, 40, 50, 60 meters and beyond. The control in this thing, even when you have the 3x optic in the Gru suppressor and task force and a field agent, it's just not ideal. There's no sense in using this over something like an AMAX or a Grau or the AK or the Pharaoh, which don't really take much skill to use. They're all very easy weapons, and they're going to beam a little bit easier too, because the damage on this thing is pretty mid-tier. It's basically a middle of the pack weapon in terms of TTK. It's more similar to something like a Grau or an M4. It's really not that incredible. It's competitive enough that you could use it and get away with it, but it's not going to be some shining star like I would say the Cold War AK is. So it's just a decent weapon. I'd expect it to get buffed here. They're probably going to buff the recoil, some make it easier to use, because typically the battle pass weapons, they want to be good, so people have an incentive to grind out the tiers and play the game and buy the pass, right? So I don't think it'll stay here for very long, but as of right now, the Grav is pretty mediocre. It's definitely, I would say, best for sniper support as it stands, because that's where it's going to be easiest to use from like 0 to 20, 30 meters. Somewhere in that mark is going to be the most ideal, but as it stands, it's just not anything too crazy. Then when it comes to the Ironhide, it's fun to use a shotgun like this. It's sort of nostalgic when you look back at older ones, but it again is really not all that impressive. It's definitely not game breaking. It's no Gallo from previous seasons or a fire shotgun from previous seasons. It's just a pretty basic shotgun. I'd say it's a little bit more unforgiving than something like a Gallo or a Street Sweeper even, just because it is that sort of lever action, so the fire rate's a little bit slower even when you do increase the fire rate with the whole reinforced heavy barrel. But if you miss a shot up close, you're probably not going to win that fight. So it's a lot more unforgiving than a Gallo, which you can just basically spam up close, right? So I don't think it really stands in competitive right now. I don't know if this one will get buffed, because shotguns really aren't a favorable meta in Warzone in general. But unfortunately, both the new DLC weapons so far really aren't anything to write home about. But now moving on into the weapon tuning. First up, we got the C58, which actually got a nerf to the recoil. They increased the recoil even more, which is unfortunate because the C58 was already not the greatest weapon to use in terms of control. It had a noticeable kick to it. I have it in competitive. Truthfully, I don't think a simple recoil nerf is going to drop it down to viable. It's definitely more borderline now than it was before. However, it is just a recoil pattern, and despite it being a little bit more than before, you can still learn that pattern and counter it pretty much perfectly and make it look like it has no recoil if you know exactly how that weapon is going to behave thanks to predictive recoil. So it's going to be harder to use. Its damage is still relatively decent. It's that mid-tier TTK yet again that really favors neck shots and headshots. If you're able to land, you know, potentially 2 of those in a gunfight, you're probably still going to fry with it, but it's nowhere near what it was you know, when it was the meta AR, when it had pretty much no recoil, great power, good mobility. Now it's just, you know, mid-tier up there with some of these other competitive ARs. Now the EM2 is pretty much in the same position. This also got a recoil nerf, so it's going to be a little bit harder to use. This, if anything, I would say is probably now borderline viable and less competitive. And honestly, for the sake of this video, we can drop this one down. Really, when it comes down to the EM2, while it does have really good damage and it's, you know, solid for sniper support, the lack of mobility, the pretty slow fire rate, and now the very noticeable recoil pretty much at all ranges is just not ideal when you're trying to compare it to other rifles. Casual players really won't be using this thing. It's really just a high risk, high reward kind of weapon. But now it's even higher risk because it takes more effort to use because of that recoil nerf. So C58 versus EM2, C58's way easier to use and way more forgiving. The EM2, not so much. So while it is still relatively competitive, I think the better home for it is going to be in that viable category. Now, the MG82 also got a recoil nerf and a kick nerf. So basically, it's going to be way harder to use than before. It's going to be way more difficult to actually stay on target and control the recoil. But at the same time, I'm torn here because the TTK is just insane. Honestly, I'm surprised they didn't nerf the TTK here, really. I don't think the MG82 needed a recoil adjustment and a recoil nerf. They just needed to reduce its TTK, because if you're able to land your shots with this thing, it's still going to have one of the best TTKs in the entire game across range. But obviously, actually landing those shots is now a lot more difficult. I would say it is strictly uncompetitive because of the damage output, but it's getting closer to viable because of that, you know, increased recoil now and that, you know, raised difficulty. It's a tough one because it is probably the most high risk, high reward weapon in the game right now. But without touching the damage here, I don't think it has a reason to drop below competitive. You're just not going to see this used as much now because, frankly, players don't like to work for their kills. They want whatever is point and shoot, what's easiest to use. And the MG82 is not that. Then the Stoner also got a recoil and a kick nerf as well. It's going to be slightly harder to use the Stoner now, but honestly, I don't think this one leaves competitive either. The Stoner, even after this, is still very easy to use. Its recoil really is not all that bad to begin with, so nerfing that is not going to just, you know, destroy this weapon by any means. Its damage output is pretty solid still. They haven't really adjusted that all that much. It's one of the better long-range weapons in the game. I'm not a huge fan because it's a bit too slow for my liking, but just because it's a little bit harder to use, I don't think that makes it significantly worse than the PKM or the Bruin or the MG82, right? It's definitely easier to use than the MG82. So for that reason, I don't feel like this one moves, and honestly, this weapon tuning in general didn't do a whole lot face value. They did also make one slight attachment adjustment. They basically made the OTS reload worse on the fast mag and also the 40-round mag. It doesn't really change the weapon all that much, though. It's still going to be great for those 0 to 12 meter fights if you're able to land chest, neck, or headshots. So this one also doesn't move. I'm kind of surprised at the lack of adjustments they really made to the overall meta with this weapon tuning, but with all those other changes in place, with the C58 now harder to use, the EM2 harder to use, the MG82 a little bit less desirable, one thing I think is solidified, that is the fact that the Cold War AK-47 is the best weapon in the entire game. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now. I've sort of been on this meta for a while. I think this weapon is the most versatile. It's great for sniper support. Up close, that damage output is pretty much unbeatable. So easily, no doubt in my mind, best sniper support weapon. But you can also build it for medium range and long range specifically, which I personally prefer because I'm not that huge on sniping. And it's still one of the best guns in the game. Its damage output is phenomenal across all ranges, 0 to 100 and beyond meters. It is one of the most competitive guns in the game, making it one of the most versatile guns in the game, and in turn, one of the best in the entire game. So with all these other nerfs that took place and not a single thing happening to the Cold War AK, it is easily a top meta weapon right now. Kind of surprised by that. I'm going to be honest, I think this is going to be nerfed in the coming days. Usually they do some surprise weapon tuning a few days after an update takes place, so I'm sure part of this video will be invalidated in the coming days because they just love to do that. But right now, as it stands, the Cold War AK is easily the best rifle, and in my opinion, the best ranged weapon in the game. Pretty much for all these, it's that copy and paste setup of Grew Suppressor, Task Force Barrel for ranged weapons, or even on most subs. You want to go for a Field Agent Grip on ranged weapons. You want to go for the, you know, semi-largest mag, usually the one that's not going to slow down your ADS too much, but give you some extra ammo. Then either a 3x optic or a wrap or a stock on there as well. For the SMGs, it's pretty basic all around for anything in the competitive or viable category. Grew Suppressor, Task Force, Tiger Team, largest magazine and Raider stock is usually the go-to. MW Weapons is pretty basic with monolithic, largest barrel, optic, grip, magazine on there too. So very basic copy and paste setups between all these in the top meta and competitive categories, and really nothing too different there. But the meta was shifted up a little bit. If anything, with these changes to some of the rifles, I think things like the Grau and the AMAX and the M4 now have a little bit more of a chance in the meta. The Farah is also pretty favorable. This might be like my number 2 rifle in the game right now. It'd probably be Cold War AK, Farah, maybe XM4, because just how things have changed. Although I do really like the C58 still. It's just a little bit more competitive all around for the rifles, I would say. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully it helped you out. If it did, let me know by dropping a like on it. It would be seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, feel free to do so. That way you can always stay up to date with absolutely everything going on in COD. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. And I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.